and Anime is coming in. And minimize my chat. There's Anime.
Hi, I'm here.
Well, hello, everybody.
Hello.
Oh, I hear Deb now.
I am going to, since this is a small crowd, I'm not going to mute everybody. So, but if you feel like, you've got some dogs barking or you want to click your pen incessantly, you feel free to mute yourself. And I'm going to show, I created a number of PowerPoint slides. You can have a Bible handy, and then I can also bring up scripture text. But for the first part of this, it's pictures. So, but I will describe, Deb, I'll describe it to you, and then you can look at them on YouTube as well. And Judy, if you can hear me, you'll be able to see them there. All right, so I'm going to share. I'm going to come over here to PowerPoint, and I am going to start the show. So Mary of Magdala is our first faithful women, and she should have the title of the first witness of the resurrection, because she is, by all accounts, one of the most important people in the New Testament for the Gospels, for Easter, for Christianity. Mary of Magdala has a massively important role. I don't think it's not even possible to, if I was introducing her, it just would not be possible to say enough superlatives for her. She's got it going on. She's the one that's paying attention. She's the one that shows up. She's the one that's there. But I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, because another title for this Bible study could be called "The Woman, the Myth, and the Falsehoods," because Mary Magdalene, unfortunately, doesn't always get the correct subtitles below her name. She doesn't get the right caption. She doesn't get the right. She doesn't get a good introduction. And what we do know about her sometimes has been wrong. So I hope to answer, who was she, what do we know, and what have others gotten so horribly wrong? All right, so we're going to start with first a couple incorrect images. The first one is Tintoretto's Magdalena Penitente, which means the penitent, Magdalene. That, of course, is the town that she came from. In some references, she's described just simply as Magdalena, or as the lady from Magdalene, because there were so many Marys. As you can see, she is not heavily dressed. Now, to be a little bit fair to the artist, it was well known that artists studied the female form because it was judged to be the most beautiful and the most difficult to appropriately represent in art. So to be fair to them, they often wanted to paint and draw women, but the church was the main patron for many decades. So unfortunately, that meant that if they wanted to draw a half-naked woman, they had to pick someone in the Bible that they felt like would fit. And so unfortunately, Mary Magdalene gets more than one famous picture. This is one of them. And then we also have two. Now I added some black ink over Guido Reni's portrait because he just went for full frontal. And in all cases, she's supposed to be looking penitently at a crucifix, as though she has rediscovered her life. She's reconsidered her past, and she now has a future that is with the faith. Why she doesn't have clothes on if she's discovered her way, that might be the question. So Guido Reni, Again, another artist in the 1500s. Many of these very stereotypical images of Mary Magdalene appear in the 1500s. Another very famous one occurs by the artist Titian in 1512, and it's based off of the Latin phrase "Noli me tangere," which means "do not hold on to me," which is one of Jesus's famous phrases that he says to Mary Magdalene. And for some reason in this painting, it looks like Mary's trying to rip off his clothes. I mean, it's just, it really borderlines offensive. And so that's the way the artist made sense of that phrase. Yeah, so Mary Magdalene gets not very many good paintings. So where does all this come from? Where does all this misinformation come from? Unfortunately, the start of the misinformation comes in largest part by Pope Gregory I, who was reigning pope between 590 and 604. And he did an entire series of sermons mischaracterizing and confusing Mary of Magdalene with, it seems most likely, Mary of Bethany, who we're not going to study tonight. We'll study another night. But Mary of Bethany, maybe, not even for her, Mary of Bethany maybe had a past in sex work. Maybe. For her, it's not even definite. And I put, yes, that long ago, right? We're talking about, you know, this didn't start in the 1500s. If we saw all those paintings in the 1500s, this started, you know, 560 years after the resurrection ish. So thanks, Greg. Thanks a lot. You really messed up the image of an important person. But it's not like that stopped. And it's not like in the modern era that we have done a very good job correcting it. The Catholic Church came out with a statement in 1969, that they had erroneously portrayed Mary Magdalene in many of their official representations and commentaries. But still, to this day, the pictures that you see on the scene, the Last Temptation of Christ, that little picture on the bottom, and the Da Vinci Code, which are also modern depictions, both of them major, lots of cost, lots of media exposure. Both of them, one of their key parts of their plot line and their thread was anybody see them? Nobody read Da Vinci Code?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wasn't she supposedly married to Jesus?
Yeah. So not only was she a previous sex worker, but she also continued to have sex with Jesus. She married the guy. And, you know, now in the Last Temptation of Christ, that was a temptation that Jesus had in his mind. She was still in the depiction, but nonetheless, it was supposedly just imaginary. Mary Magdalene still got the stab in the back, but it was imaginary. The Da Vinci Code, the movie and the book, both had this major plot twist of the entire thread of ancestral power for the Jesus family came through Mary Magdalene. Now, of course, the Da Vinci Code was, and a few other confused and misplaced portrayals of Mary Magdalene have been loosely, and let me emphasize, loosely connected to the Gospel of Thomas and countless other dubious or late additions, or maybe even sometimes just simply ignoring actual records and referring to other mischaracterizations by like Pope Gregory or one of the paintings. Sometimes they just come from the paintings of Mary Magdalene. You know, in many representations, Mary Magdalene has red hair, but nowhere in the Bible record does it say that she has red hair. Now, if you want to get into the nitty-gritty of where some of those outside of the Bible resources come from, you can look them up. If you look up the actual texts of the Gospel of Thomas, you'll find that it's like Swiss cheese. There's like lots of holes. And from a biblical perspective, none of the manuscripts are old enough to really have any authority over the Gospels or anything in the New Testament. That's how relatively new they are by date. They also, in terms of weight of those kinds of records, lest you would bump into any conspiracy theory friends, you know, sometimes they're out there, oh, Mary Magdalene was real. No, she was real, but she wasn't a conspiracy. If you take a look at the records, most of those non-canonical records, you know, those quote-unquote gospels that don't appear in the Bible, they don't show up in multiple places. So in other words, the more valuable and powerful a manuscript is, you can literally track it back through the ages, and you can see how the gospel spread through the world. Okay, so you know it's here, it's translated to here, it's here, it's translated to this language. You know, you could almost look at the way the gospel spreads through the world on the map of the Bible manuscripts. But those old texts don't show up that way. There's like one language, and it's found in one place, and it's in bad shape. So you don't have people protecting the manuscript because it's not valuable. You don't have people translating the manuscript because they know somebody made it up.
Okay.
So there's all those issues with those backstories. Now, does it make good fiction to think that Jesus got married?
Self movies.
It sells movies
And books.
and books. I mean, I don't know about you, but I bought the Da Vinci Code. It's a decent story for fiction. It made my stomach turn when I got to the ending. But it is a page turner. The other problem with misinterpretations, you know, or that, well, how many times have we heard somebody repeat a conspiracy theory or something that is definitely not true as though it is?
Oh, probably daily.
Yeah. Yeah. So sorry, Mary. We're trying to get your story corrected. Any questions so far? Because I'm kind of zipping through the beginning. Everybody still with me?
Yep.
Yep. Yes.
All right. So why the problems? Why the issues? Some of it, scholars think, is just simple confusion. I mean, how many Marys were there in the Bible story?
A lot. A lot.
Yeah, there were a lot. There were a lot of Marys. In some passages, they were just referred to as "and the women." Sorry, ladies, but they didn't keep close tabs on where you were. Maybe there's something to be maybe there's something to be said for that, right? The women you can trust where they go. The men, you're like, oh, that was Phil of Barnabas's son. We saw him. He was over there. You got to keep an eye on that guy. Steve, that's Steve of the Kaufman family. We saw him. But the women, there's so many women, and the Marys aren't always real clear as to which Mary it is. Sometimes you can literally be reading the Bible text and it's like, wait, was that Mary the mother of Jesus or was that another Mary? Literally, sometimes the Bible text says another Mary. So we have women, more women, Marys, another Mary, other women. And sometimes the Bible text just says, and other people, other, other women and children. Some of that is due to, again, a patriarchal society that women were not necessarily always counted.
Yep.
Ugh,
Usually not.
no, no. And then in the case of the Easter story, we have the difficult situation of the four gospel writers and everybody in the entire following of Jesus were too excited. They were just too excited with the good news to take an accurate tally. I mean, if you read it, you can kind of tell that everything happened in a blitz and a blur and a ball of excitement. And they, eventually got a chance to write it all down. But then they were like, oh, was that, how many Marys were in that scene? Well, it was all of them. And so, in order to deal with that confusion, believe it or not, you're gonna love this. You're just gonna love this. The church came up with a very efficient solution to just simply identify the three Marys, the three Marys that are most prominent in the resurrection stories and aren't quite clear as to which one they are. We're going to put the three Marys together and we're going to give them all the same feast day. So, and then literally by slang, the three Marys then also became the three Marys plus, because then some other people were like, well, there were other Marys and we might not have the right three Marys. It could have been one of them could have traded places. But it was a simple confusion. And that's a big part of why Mary Magdalene's image got swapped with, we think, another Mary. So what's actually true? What do we actually know about Mary Magdalene? Well, actually a pretty good bit. I mean, for a woman in Bible times, we know a good bit. For one, she is mentioned by name and place, which is significant because many women don't get, as I said, they don't necessarily get that honor. And thankfully, we're able to find Magdala, the town, is the same in the same general area as modern Migdal, Israel. And actually, the archaeological sites associated with Magdala is a source of significant archaeological pieces. So,
Oh,
if you want to know more about that, you can look that up. Mary also is the apostle to the apostles. That is what we know to be true. I mean, there is significant biblical witness to tell us that Mary was the one that told the apostles about Jesus being resurrected, that the tomb was empty. Mary gets that honor. Even if she wasn't always given it, that's the truth. It is also true that Mary is a woman. As much as different times in the church, we might not have wanted to own up to the fact that she is a woman. She is. And whether or not the church at different times approved of Jesus, approaching her, talking to her, being touched by her, Jesus did talk to Mary Magdalene. And the other big truth is that Jesus accepted many women into positions of power that future societies did not. And I mean many future societies. Jesus was way ahead of the times. I mean, the sheer number of Bible stories that Jesus talks to women and it treats them with respect and honor is just it's mind-boggling, particularly for that time. It's also true that Mary owed her life in wholeness and reality to Jesus. She was healed by Jesus, and she was one of the first ones to really recognize that Jesus was the resurrection and the life. You know, she could sing that song first. What else is true? She's likely a victim of male power. The church did not do her justice. She was not given the accolades that she should have for, you know, many years. She was definitely healed by Jesus of demon possession. The biblical witness says 7 demons, which usually kind of like the intensity of the afflictions, the illnesses. That's the only description of her past that we have, and none of it is sexual. And just in case you're thinking it, a demon, you know, being possessed by 7 demons would not have been a characteristic of what would be identified as a sexual impropriety. Okay, they just don't, like, even in Bible times, they don't match up. We also know for sure that Mary was likely bold and courageous, passionate, and careful listener. Where some of the disciples might not have been paying attention, Mary, it seems, was. Kudos, Mary. You did a good job. And then just a couple more pieces of truth. Societies have transferred their own prejudices and misconceptions into the Bible. Right? People might say things like, well, it says in the Bible, blank, blank, blank. But we have to remember that many times what people say, it says in the Bible, doesn't actually say in the text. And Mary Magdalene is a prime example of that truth. Careful reading and study has always been a good direction. So if anytime somebody says something that you think maybe doesn't sound like it is from the Bible, say, you know what, hey, let's sit down and look at that together. And the truth is for sure Luke 8 and Mark 16 verses 9. Even though it's in the longer or the one addition to Mark, it still reiterates the same understanding of Mary Magdalene. As well as some women who had been cured of evil spirits and infirmities, Mary called Magdalene, from whom 7 demons had gone out. That biblical description, every time it is added with Mary Magdalene, there is no discrepancy. When you look across the manuscripts, they all say that same descriptor for her. So that is something that we can be confident that's true. And there's some more truths. And watch my time here. I want to give you time for some questions. The first witnesses were all women. Sorry, guys.
We ran away.
Yeah, the guys were cowards, and the women were like, "Wait, this doesn't make sense. We need to figure this out." And this was both an issue and a strength. It was both a lack of credibility and also a source of credibility. In that, while women might be perceived as sometimes, as we hear in the Gospels, telling an idle tale, women are also known to be careful observers. And a woman not being in a position of power is not going to jeopardize her already weak position with a crazy story. So Jesus appearing to women was literally like throwing it in the face of power. Mary appears in all of these citations 2 times in the resurrection account of Luke in chapter 24 in verse 10 and 22. And she appears in John, the first verse, and then in the long extended section, verses 11 to 18. And that's where Jesus says, "Don't hold on to me because I have not yet ascended to the Father." And that's actually probably best understood with the next verse where he says, "But go tell those cowardly men." Okay. And then, as I mentioned, Mark 16, and then Matthew 28, verse 1. Well, what's to notice about all of those is that all 4 Gospels represent Mary Magdalene in that primo position of power of recognizing and witnessing the resurrection. The four Gospels are harmonious, but they don't always agree so precisely and so definitively. You know, it's like asking four people what a tree looked like. In this case, none of them hesitate. Mary Magdalene, Mary Magdalene, Mary Magdalene. What is an unfortunate truth, and I hate it to be the concluding word, so try not to pay too much attention to it. But when you skip ahead into the beginnings of the church's stories, 1 Corinthians 15 verses 5, where Peter retells the account of how the Easter story made its progression through the disciples, skips over the women until after all of the men have found out. Yeah, sorry, Mary. Turns out Peter wasn't a whole lot better than Greg. So, any questions?
This is more of a comment. Last Easter season, a year ago, I read a book. It was called Mary Magdalene, and it was a fictional account, but I found it I really liked it. I found it very enlightening. It didn't portray her as a sexual being. It did portray her as maybe falling in love with Jesus, and just thinking about those kinds of thoughts. But as the story went on, she realized that wasn't her role. But I found it really, really good. I'll have to try to look it up and find the author.
I think I know which one you're talking about. But yeah, send it to me.
Okay.
I think the big question for Mary Magdalene and for all women in leadership and power is, when they are near a man that is powerful, do they have to have romantic feelings towards them? I'm going to say no, but I'm not a woman.
I would say no.
I would say no.
And I think women can have men friends without it being sexual.
Yes. Or even not even that strongly romantic.
Yeah,
whatever.
Exactly.
I agree with
No
you, Kathy.
romantic.
Yeah.
I completely agree too, but I do think that that's something that is often portrayed in media very much, that is the case, even though I think most of us sitting around here are saying it's not. It's certainly,
Right.
I think, the predominant characterization of women in those roles.
Yep, it certainly is.
I would even go so far as to say I think it comes from men.
Ah,
Yeah.
there you go.
I think it's harder for men, and this is my opinion. I don't have the psychological basis to make this an actual statement. but I think that men have a harder time being around women that are powerful and strong without having some kind of inkling.
That's men. That's men.
That's that's
Men.
that's it.
Yeah.
That's
Sorry.
the general. I'm not saying all men. I'm just saying as a generalization.
Right.
So I'm not pointing to Dick or Steve or myself.
No.
Sorry,
That's a
guys.
strong wife.
Mhm. I
All
think
due respect,
women's. Yeah.
with all due respect, Pastor, I don't necessarily agree with you.
Okay.
In my experience being from a business point of view, from a
Okay.
big company,
Mhm.
I guess my question is then, where does it come from?
culture, it's a cultural,
It
Culture.
comes from the world.
definitely a cultural
The world way.
Society.
phenomenon.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So, Pastor, do you have any good readings on her that you could suggest? Do you have anything that we could?
Unfortunately, I thought I had one. Carrie had gotten the book, and it's about Consider the Women, but Mary Magdalene's not on that list. I can email that to you. I did not.
Go ahead. No hurry.
No, that's a good question. I mean, there have been a number of books about women in the Bible. Mary Magdalene, again, I think she's gotten a lot more media attention about her misperceptions than the truth. The one that you mentioned, Deb, I think is one of the first ones in modern times that's been relatively fair.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. I mean, it really, from my standpoint, I felt that it portrayed her more as a follower and a disciple of Jesus than anything else. That she was just, and she was so, she was ostracized by her family and her community. And she really went through some difficult, just horrible things and horrible times. And I just really felt a lot of compassion for her.
Yeah. I mean, Jesus healed her of a great sickness. So I'm sure that there was a huge transformation in her life.
Well, I've heard about the book of Thomas, but I've only ever heard of it as a controversial thing. Is that there is this book and it says this and it says that, but you know, I look back at Doubting Thomas and say, maybe that's why he didn't get put in. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't even seem like that it was necessarily him that wrote it. It's like that far out
Yes.
in terms of dating, because you can date all those kinds of papers, and none of the people that thought it was a super early dated document were outside of its pocketbook. You know what I mean? So all the independent verification of its dates were as a later document.
Oh, okay.
But if you read it, it's not really good reading.
It isn't.
No, it's not. It's really kind of horrible reading, because old manuscripts, you have to remember, like, you know, when we have pieces of paper now in a book, you know, it's flat. And when it's, you know, it's bound up in a book like that. In Jesus' time, you know, everything was in a scroll. So when you store something like this in a jar, and, you know, there's any kind of, you know, detrimental contact of bacteria or whatever in this spot, guess what? Everything in that area of the scroll through all the layers is gone. So when you open it up, you know, and you go to read it, that's why I say the Gospel of Thomas is like Swiss cheese, because, you know, the first time I went to read it critically, I was like, my gosh, there's more words missing than are practically there. I mean, I'm really not exaggerating. There's literally like a word, a blank, 2 words, a blank. I mean, it's just, you know, and so then what many of those people did was they just literally filled in the blanks.
Oh, nice.
Made it up.
So,
Yeah.
Pastor Fitch, when is the last reference to Mary Magdalene in the Bible? Does it have anything later than just post-resurrection?
no, and that's a good point. You know, there are a number of questions as to why that might be. She doesn't make it into the New Testament books that we have. Again, that could mean any number of things. I mean, maybe personality. Maybe she couldn't get out of her, you know, kind of male-dominated family grouping. The few women in the New Testament that are able to kind of be full apostles and start churches are usually really rich and powerful. And Mary Magdalene, by all accounts, wasn't. So that's kind of the biggest guess as to why she doesn't show up. She's not rich. You remember, she had a good part of her life, she was not well. And, you know, being a woman would put you, you know, so far down, and then not being well would put you down another notch, unfortunately.
And not having any money, another notch.
And I mean, money, another notch. Probably not having a husband, another notch. You know, so she probably just didn't have enough influence to make it outside of the gospel story. There are some extra biblical traditions about you know, every single character in the Bible, but it's really hard with them to know how much is legend and how much is true. So that's why I don't refer to that necessarily, especially in a Bible study when I'm trying to talk about what's true and not true. And some of those traditions you can find verification for, but Mary Magdalene, there's not a whole lot. Not. And unfortunately, way too quickly, her story got muddled.
Really know, we don't know what happened to her.
No, we don't. And unfortunately, you know, the other reality is, if you figure that she was a contemporary of Jesus, so Jesus died when he was, you know, let's say 33, it seems, is a good number. If Mary Magdalene was around his age, she wouldn't have had a whole lot more life to live.
Yeah.
Especially if she had been sick, you know, that could have taken a toll on her body. Or maybe she, you know, found another Christian husband and they moved to another town and lived happily ever after, you know. You know, we just don't know.
Well, Deb, in the book, did they ever indicate what happened beyond the resurrection?
You know, I'm sitting here trying to think. I think it did go into her life a little after that, didn't it? If I remember correctly.
Oh, I didn't. Okay.
I'll have to, you know, I donated it back to the library. I'll have
Okay.
to try to find it again. But
All
I
right.
did really enjoy it. But I kind of think that it went into a little bit of her life after
Okay.
the resurrection.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But again, it was a novel, so
Exactly.
Yes.
It was a fictional.
Yes.
Right.
how much
But
was that licensed? You know?
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
it followed enough of the truthful story that's why I
Yeah.
really, really enjoyed it. It
Yeah.
wasn't way far out there.
Okay.
My personal guess is that Mary Magdalene was probably with the bunch of disciples for quite a bunch of years and was probably in that kind of growing bunch of the church. And my guess is, particularly for the Gospel of Mark community, that every time they would get to that kind of cliffhanger ending, you know, they would kind of wait a little bit, and then they'd be like, "Right, Mary," and then she would come in and say, "But I found him alive, and I couldn't keep it to myself," and then she would tell her story. I think she was probably used by the church as a gospel witness until it mattered that she was a woman. So however long they could make, you know, however long they could continue that in society, I think was how long it lasted. And my guess is probably at that point, she might have just kind of found a place in one of the house churches that was getting set up. Because I mean, remember that you know, the Christian church just kind of just exploded and just, you know, went all over the place. And a lot of the church stayed where it was. It's possible she went back to Magdala. I mean, they have a pretty robust archaeological set of stuff there today. It seems as though they had a very intense faith. One of the big famous finds of Magdala, if you go to look them up, is they found this representation, this like stone carving of first century Judaism, which had a representation of the temple theology carved into it. And so, you know, the presumption is that she could still have had quite a rich faith life in her hometown. it's probably more likely that she stayed there. I mean, men could travel a lot more easily than women could. So usually when people guess where she wound up, that's kind of the guess.
Mhm.
Or maybe it was a uncle that was like, you know, her charge, you know, and so I don't know.
Lost.
Usually truth
Speculation.
is, what's that?
Just
Lost.
speculate.
Lost to history.
Yeah, lost to history,
Yeah.
speculation, but usually, you know, and all of the history stuff that I've seen, you know, the truth is usually simpler than fiction. You know, I mean, it just is. You know, it might be a page turner to think that, you know, Jesus and her were just a perfect match, but it doesn't seem to bear that out. And you even notice, I think I forgot to notice it, but in the John 20:11-18, there's no romance at all between their words. She addresses him as teacher. You know, he addresses her properly. So it's all very very up and up
Mhm.
in that exchange. If I feel like if there was any question of that, or if there was any reality, that it would make it into at least one of the Gospels.
Mhm.
That's the other interesting thing. I mean, she's never discounted in the Gospels. You know, that's why I think it's really the most representative truth to see her as sticking around while the church could still handle it. Oh, here's a woman. Yep, she was the first witness.
Mhm. Yeah.
Just such a model of devotion. That's what, she's just so devoted. I mean, her whole life is just focused on him and following him, and she's just always there. And
Mhm.
she's always intrigued me because I just always felt that she was just committed and devoted totally.
Yeah. She is one of the three that was there. You know, that were there at the end. That were there through it all.
At the foot of the cross.
Yeah.
So I'll show my ignorance. Is she sanctified? Is she sanctified?
Yes. Yeah, and she, you know, when they were initially put on the same day, and then I don't remember how long ago exactly they were separated. But she has her own day now.
Okay. So the church finally loosened up.
Yeah. I mean, it only took until 1969 for them to totally, you know, rewind and get the white out of the correct spots. That's all. Just, you know.
That's the Church of Rome.
Just a few years.
Mhm.
It moves very slowly.
Yes.
Yes, it does.
Mhm.
All right. So next week we will be studying another faithful woman. And I won't tell you who yet.
Oh, okay.
Keep us waiting.
I'll keep you hanging,
Okay.
but I'll give you a hint. I might have mentioned her tonight.
Ooh.
Oh,
Hmm.
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 Mary. There you
might have mentioned her.
Maybe a Mary.
I heard somebody.
Maybe even a
Yeah,
Mary.
like another Mary, huh?
Another. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Pastor.
You're welcome. Have a good
Thanks
night,
so much.
everybody.
Okay.
go.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Everybody take care.
You too.
Yep.
Uh-huh.
Yep. She's gone.